Good morning. I want first to thank everyone here for the service that they have performed for our country, and also for inviting me here to hopefully give you some words of wisdom. I do want to share with you that I do come from a background of a variety of service connections. My father served in World War II. My first husband served 4 years in the Air Force in peacetime. My current husband served 4 years during Vietnam. And my stepson served 4 years in the Coast Guard. So we've had a variety. And again, I thank all of you. And I must share that the D.A.V store is one of my favorite places to shop. I live in Ann Arbor, but Westland is close enough. Every speech has to have a title, and I felt with the idea of hopefully being able to leave you with some good messages, this one I titled Hot Buttons, because we all have them. I was asked specifically to share words of wisdom, to encourage, uplift, and to leave you with something to think about. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to cover that and more. The other day I read The Perfect Story about a perfect person, and I thought I'd share that with you. It's about someone that gets up in the morning, doesn't need caffeine or pep pills or anything else to get them motivated and keep them going. It's an individual that is always cheerful, never seems to complain emotionally about anything. They are happy to see you at all times, and even when you blame them for something, they're still okay with it. Now, if you fit that picture, you're probably the family dog, because no one else is that happy. And let's be realistic, no one in this world is perfect, including me. It's difficult sometimes to admit when we've made mistakes, but we all do them. And besides, wouldn't it be rather a boring world if there was all this perfection? That's what makes us each unique, is that we're not perfect. In our daily lives, many of us fly off the handle at the drop of a hat. Those are the moments that I call hot buttons. Have you ever dropped your keys or dropped a product on the floor that you had to bend down and pick it up? And seconds later, you drop the same one. And at that point, the hot button is triggered. And why? Well, I had to laugh when I wrote this. My current husband read through it and recognized himself, because that was him I was talking about. We're all guilty, except me. But do you find that you overreact sometimes to a lot of things? We're all guilty of it. And it isn't necessarily that it's right or wrong, it's human nature. Sometimes we hurt the ones we love the most. Why? I guess only God knows, because there is no real answer to it. But at the same time, why do we do that? Maybe having a little better understanding about thinking about that ahead of time, it would be to our benefit. But unfortunately, as I said, most of us do have hot buttons. It's learning how to flip them off or change the reaction at times when it's least inappropriate. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is the physical hurt. And I'm not talking, specifically about physical as we think about it. My father was a good example, though, of somebody that had major hot button problems. As a kid growing up, there was never a cupboard door, a closet door, a household door that didn't get slammed at some given point. That was his physical reaction. And it would be over the most trivial thing. It frequently sent me to tears as a kid because I didn't understand what was happening. As I got older, I learned how to get out of the room and avoid. Here he goes again. As I became a teenager, I either left the house or just did everything I could to avoid this. One day I asked my dad, what is setting you off? And he had no explanation. And I grew up knowing that he had served in wartime. And I asked, did it have a bearing on him serving our country? And he said something I don't want to talk about. He refused to discuss it. "70 years ago, there wasn't any help for anybody out there that didn't have physical scars. His were emotional, and I'm sure that there's a lot of you that have both physical and emotional scars. Those things don't go away, especially the physical ones. But learning how to share, to talk about it, maybe that's part of the key. I'm a big believer in support groups. Not necessarily seeing the neighborhood shrink, but support groups, because people that have walked the same mile you have more understanding than anyone else. My dad's excuse was wartime. But again, not a discussion. There's an old saying, we only hurt the ones we love. And every time, maybe instead of that, we need to grab a glass of cold water. Not to cool off the person that's exploding, but maybe to just consume it ourselves, to take a deep breath and walk away. Those hot buttons are in all of us. Because let's face it, none of us are perfect. Too often we are triggered and then the damage is done. We need to learn, like the dog, let it roll off our back. The ones we hurt most, not only are those that surround us, but ourselves. Because later we realize we've stepped on somebody's emotions and really shouldn't have. I've never been to war. I can't relate where you're at. I don't have the physical scars or the emotional ones that the war can bring. But I can offer you suggestions, comments, because I too have had a loss. Very different, perhaps, than most of you, and yet some of you have had similar. 24 years ago, I received a phone call that my first husband had died on the job. He was dead on arrival at the hospital. He'd had a heart attack on the job. Emotionally, I was left absolutely numb. Where do I go? My world, as I had known it, had just crumbled. It took me a long time to heal from that. We never forget, but we can heal. One of the things that worked the best for me was a support group. And that was because not only was I able to share what I had experienced with others that had experienced very similar, but I was also able to find out that maybe it wasn't as awful as I thought it was. Don't get me wrong. I dearly loved that man, and I didn't know where I was going to go without him. But what I learned was that while I had 24 years with him, there were people in these support groups that had 1, 2, 5 years with their loved one. Auto accidents, cancers. They watched their husbands die, piece by piece. They had children that were 1-year-old, 2-year-olds. My kids were 19 and 23. They got to know their dad. So as I learned about other people's situations, I began to realize, as tough as it was for me, it could have been worse. And sometimes when we recognize somebody else's pain other than our own, we begin to see a brighter side. Talking about it, and not just over a beer and BSing, I'm talking about it, what you feel, your inner emotions. And how do you start this? One step at a time. 2 people create conversation. That's all it takes. Pretty soon you have 3, 4, 5, 20. It can happen, and it can help heal. The VA programs that are out there have done wonders for so many. But there's a lot more you can do for yourselves. I had choices to make. So do you. My choice was to wallow in my own self-pity, or to become stronger and better and help others because of his death. Because of his death, I have worked in support groups for years. I've worked in various grief groups, because loss is loss. Whether you've lost a limb or you've lost a loved one, there's an emotional, traumatic loss that has happened. So a lot of the same process is still the same, and so are the choices. I blamed Ford Motor Company because he worked ridiculous hours. Do you think Ford Motor Company cared? And I say that wholeheartedly because I used to say to my husband, you're going to drop dead on the job because of all the hours you're working, and they're just going to move you over and move on. I ate those words for a long time because that's literally what happened. When the ambulance drove away, management came in and said, back to work, guys. They refused. They walked off the job. They felt they owed their coworker that much respect. I vowed I would never own another Ford product because that was my way of getting back. When I began to realize that kind of bitterness was eating me alive, and Ford Motor didn't care, that's when I realized I had to change my attitude. And that's a lot of what it's all about, is changing our attitudes. Another example related to my first husband's death. As a woman, I could cry publicly, and I did it well. I used to laugh about having high water levels because the tears came easily. And one day at work, 6, 8 months after he had passed, as I was flooding tears, a coworker asked, "Was I okay?" And I said, "No, I'm still having a hard time with this." And she looked at me and she said, "You aren't over this by now?" And forgive what I'm about to say, but I turned to her and I said, "Does an amputee get over losing an arm or a leg? Absolutely not. This was part of me. You don't get over this kind of a loss. You learn to move on with your life, but you don't get over it. You heal, but it's not like a giant Band-Aid. This is with you forever." Sometime later, I apologized to her for being so abrupt. But I realized at that moment, it's ignorance, it's lack of education by the rest of the world that type of conversation was created. She didn't have a clue. She didn't know that in 6 months I should have been able to move on with my life. It isn't that easy, and you guys know that. But bitterness, whether it be for Ford Motor or somebody that just doesn't understand where you're at, is an emotional cancer. It will eat you from the inside out. It is something that you need to do for you, not the rest of the people, just for you. You'll be happier. People will like you. When I changed my attitude, my current husband met me and discovered that she was a likable person. I had a long way to go yet before we were ever going to have a relationship. But I had to be a positive person. I had to see the glass half full, not half empty. And when I began to have that, I liked me better too. There's a cute little story out there that some of you may have heard that I think is very appropriate in all of this. It's a story about a Cherokee Indian who's talking to his grandson about the fact that we all have two wolves inside of us that fight one another. One is evil and one is good. The one that's evil is filled with anger, jealousy, greed, resentment, inferiority, lies, and ego. The good wolf is filled with joy and peace, love, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, and truth. The little boy thought about this for a moment, and he asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" And the wise Cherokee responded, "The one you feed." Don't let the past become your future. Don't let it be the cancer within you that will destroy you. Stop feeding it. No one ever said you had to forget, but it's about letting go so that you can move forward. Remember those that have created bitterness, those that are the cause of your bitterness. For the most part, don't know and don't care. Don't let it destroy you. It's today and tomorrow that counts. Our past is just that. It's behind us. It doesn't mean you ever have to forget. It just means let go. So where and how do you start? As I said before, one step at a time, one foot in front of the other. Start talking. You can also start with faith. There is a higher power in your life, hopefully. Turn to God. Prayer does wonders. For me, I found I had left my church for a while. It hurt too much to sit there where we had been a family. But when I found I needed him in my life again, I went back. I went back looking for answers. And he didn't really give me any. But he made me realize it was up to me. If it was to be, it was up to me. And that's true for all of you. If it is to be, it is up to you. I can't tell you. Your friends can't tell you. All of these wonderful people up here can't tell you. It's got to come from within. But you can start by trying to be positive. See the glass half full, not half empty. Look at the sky. Do you see the clouds or do you see the sun peeking through? Start thinking like a winner. No, it doesn't mean you'll win the lottery. But maybe, just maybe, it means that on the inside, you begin becoming a winner. And when you start becoming a winner, you smile more often. And people around you will start wondering, what are you up to? Keep them guessing. Maybe taking lessons from our family pets. Let it roll off our back. Walk away. Happiness starts from within, and it can be contagious. Ever smiled at somebody and not have them smile back? It is contagious. Our pets don't have to fake it. They see us for who we are. They're our best friend, and they can put a smile on your face and warm your heart. They'll forgive us our transgressions, and their calmness is relaxing. And more importantly, they'll love you unconditionally. Perhaps peace in our heart is what we need. Remember, when you start showing the world a difference, they'll either think you're up to something or you want something. I'd like to leave you with words from Henry Ford. One final thought. If you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. The choice is yours. One way is bitter, and the other is better. Which way do you choose?